Voltron fans! Welcome to the 5th year VoltCon. We are ready to kick off our first panel for the weekend, and it's called Lions, No Tigers, No Bears, Oh My. And with me, I am Marc Morrell, the host of Let's Voltron, the official Voltron podcast, and my co-host Greg Tyler is here.
Welcome, Voltron fans.
And our special guest, Shannon Muir.
Great to be here, thank you, and I'm glad to see all of you.
Okay, so we're going to get rolling here. We are talking about the Voltron Lions. Basically, in every version of the series, you've seen the Voltron Lions. They stand for power and unity. This is also going to include things from various comic series, but for the sake of time, we're going to be focusing just on the television iterations. So you know the comics from Dynamite, Devil's Due, Image Comics, and Lion Forge.
And modern comics back in the 80s.
Right. Mm-hmm. So there were 5 television iterations that we're going to be talking about. We're starting with Beast King Go Lion, which was the Japanese series that became Voltron. And then we're going to Voltron Defender of the Universe, released in 1984. Also Voltron the Third Dimension, released in 1998. Voltron Force, released in 2011. And Voltron Legendary Defender, released in 2016.
Now, a lot of things, when you think about the symbolism of using the lions, there are different qualities that generally are attributed to lions. There are positive traits, some of which are cautionary and methodical, courage and fearlessness, leadership, power, and strength, which I believe are the same qualities that we find echoed in all the iterations that we're going to talk about today. However, in doing the research for this panel, I also noted there are sometimes some might say more negative connotations to the image of lions. Self-centeredness, dominance, and downright dangerous. And if you think about it, particularly when looking at Beast King Go Lion, both of those can apply in certain situations. Now, another thing that's interesting to point out is the more homegrown later variations that originated with Webb all have something in common. They all focus on the idea of a spirit tie within the lions that have bonds to the pilots. And it was just an interesting trend that I noticed, and I really appreciate the added depth that it brought to all of the later series.
So let's get into technobabble. This is the Scotty or Geordie part of the presentation. How did they pilot those things? Well, back in Go Lion, and of course in the adaptation of Voltron Defender of the Universe, they used pretty traditional controls. They had those 2 little twisty handle thingamajigs, and maybe a dozen buttons or something like that, and yet they got those lions doing what they needed to do. So it was more traditional sci-fi kind of stuff. When the Third Dimension came along, again, they had all the buttons and screens and all that sort of thing, but this, to echo what Shannon just said, there was a bond between the lion and its pilot, and the lions actually depended on the pilot's souls to make them operate properly. And in one episode, the pilots actually learned to control the lions telepathically, and we see echoes of that in a later iteration too. In the Devil's Due comic, there was what was described as a psychotronic link between the pilot and the lion. And again, they got all the traditional controls, and ditto with Voltron Force with the traditional controls. But the concept of the bond between the lion and pilot was stronger there. There were actually examples of lions rejecting potential pilots, such as Sky Marshal Wade. And then in Voltron Legendary Defender, of course, each lion had quintessence. It mirrored the quintessence of its pilot, and quintessence is the Legendary Defender speak, I guess you could say, for life force. And the pilots, again, learned to operate the lions remotely through their link to the lions. So it sort of mirrors the telepathic link that they developed in the Third Dimension. Yellow Lion is the only one across all the iterations that had a consistent pilot throughout each of the iterations, and that, of course, was Hunk. And the power sources, each Lion has been described as having its own power source, a distinct one, until Legendary Defender came along. But basically, in Go Lion, it was described as being Earth energy conducted by ground protons. And in Defender of the Universe, they described Yellow's power source as magma from underground. You might be noticing a motif here. In the third dimension, it was Earth, including stone and sand. And Voltron Force never really got into the power sources, but presumably because it was kind of a spiritual sequel to Defender of the Universe, it was probably still Earth. And in Legendary Defender, Quintessence was king across all 5 of the Lions. But in some of the licensed publications, there were descriptions of the Yellow Lion being the guardian spirit of land, which certainly at least is a tip of the hat to past iterations. We're going to go through these kind of quickly, but each of the Lions has its own unique weapons. And in Go Lion, this was the only Lion that had a permanently visible weapon on its back, that big cannon that you see. And it was called Yellow Bazooka in Go Lion. Some of the other weapons were the Sandstorm, which could be projected from the Lion's mouth, Yellow Bazooka, which was, I just mentioned that, the Yellow Bazooka, the big cannon on the back, yellow missiles fired from various places, and the Yellow Sword, which was the name that they gave to the jaw blade in that show. And then Gatling missiles, I mentioned that last because it was always my favorite weapon, that big drum would sort of appear on the shoulder, and you'd see those pointy missiles shoot out of it. I always thought that was cool. How did any of those weapons appear?
It's magic.
Yeah, then maybe that's the magic. So there's that, and let's move on to Defender of the Universe. Basically the same weapons, because the visuals from Defender of the Universe were taken straight from Beast King Go Lion for most of the episodes. But there were some other weapons that were called out, such as Hydra Spheres. Rotor missiles were the Voltron term for that, the Gatling missiles in Go Lion. The Star Duster was another unique weapon. And you're going to see this as a running theme. The Lions in Defender of the Universe are kind of Swiss Army knives of weapons, so to cover every single one of those would take forever. But just from a big picture perspective, just think Go Lion, but they had different names. The third dimension had a whole bunch of its own weapons as well. Yellow Lion was unique in that show in that in one of the episodes, its lair, that lion statue you see in the desert, it was actually lifted off the ground and stolen by the robot dragons, who were sort of the villainous counterparts to the lions in several episodes of that show. And then the lions had to retrieve the lair and return it to planet Eris. There were 2 iterations of the lions in Voltron the Third Dimension, and we're going to touch on those in more detail later today in a Third Dimension panel. But the conventional Lion had weapons like the shoulder lasers, spinning laser discs, a drill head so that it could drill through stuff, had shields, proton lasers, a mouth laser, something that they just called warm power, which is some kind of a heat projection, and the iron claw. The stealth iteration of the Lion had an ability called Quark Jump, which is kind of a short-distance teleportation ability, and Ultra Stealth Mode, which made the Lion effectively invisible, and then there's a beam that was fired from the Lion's chest. In Voltron Force, once again, we have the weapon on the back, as we had with the prior iterations. The mouth could shoot a laser. We had a buzzsaw that popped out by mistake when Daniel was trying to operate the Lion early on. It popped out from the underside of the Lion. It had what was called a demolition tail, where the end of the tail was the missiles in the comic book adaptation in Voltron Force, like the old toy that Matchbox made back in the day with the little panels that folded out of the cheeks. They did a little tip of the hat in the comics. It could shoot a sandstorm from its mouth. They referenced Gatling missiles in a tip of the hat to Go Lion, and then there was a twin laser cannon, so all sorts of goodies. And then in Legendary Defender, Princess Allura, when she was talking about the nature of each of the 5 lions in the very earliest episodes, mentioned the Yellow Lion being caring and kind. But in addition to the weapons of being caring and kind, it also had armor claws. There was those big beefy things, and it sort of extended up across the back. The spinning head smash, which was something that I remember the original Paladin doing and Hunk also doing without really calling it that, as I recall. The mouth cannon, a tail laser, and a jaw blade. Many of these weapons are very similar across all 5 lines, but the yellow had that unique bulked up form that they called armor claws, I believe.
For Blue Lion has the distinction of having the most pilots across all the iterations of the television series. So you've had Sven, you've had Alora, you've had Larmina, you've had Lance. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about Blue Lion was that Blue Lion is known to be whatever it needs to be for the team. And that makes the distinction across all the other lions. But when it comes to the energy of Blue Lion, water is somehow always linked to the source of power. Even in Voltron Legendary Defender, when they talk about quintessence, it's still water that seems to be the most thing that gives it power. You can think of the episode The Depths. In some VLD publications refer to Blue Lion as the guardian spirit of the water. So some of the selected weapons of note in this one, you have the blue claws, you had the blue missiles, the blue sword, and you were talking about that as being the mouth weapon.
Yeah.
The eye flash, the harpoon missiles, the ice missiles, which was rare for blue, and then missile fish.
Yeah, this was just hey, that's what they called it in the DVDs.
They did.
Especially not with missile fish.
And the water rod. Okay.
The water rod was that projection of water that would often come out of one's mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah, just lather, rinse, repeat. It's,
Yes.
yeah, essentially it's a Go Lion.
Yeah, it was pretty much the same thing as Go Lion, but for Voltron, for Defender of the Universe. And then when we went to Voltron: The Third Dimension, we had the laser fangs, which were something that all the lions had, but Blue had them. Electro claws, shoulder lasers, a tail lash, shield systems. What was the capsule?
The capsule was basically a single person craft that could be fired from the lion's mouth, so a pilot could launch from the lion.
The proton laser, the mouth laser, the lion claws, the heat shield, which was something you would expect from red rather than blue.
That's true.
Freeze beams, tongue lash, eye beams, protective shields, and proton lines. The stealth line had the quark jump, the ultra stealth mode, and the chest beam. In Voltron Force, the selected weapons of note are the mouth laser, the eye beams, the tail laser. Now, we had talked about tail lash in the last one, but this was a tail laser. Freeze tail, jaw blade, and typhoon blast. Can we describe the typhoon blast?
The Typhoon Blast was the Voltron Force term for the water rod of the Go Lion. Just a bunch of water shooting out of it.
Right. And in Legendary Defender, the freeze ray, the sonic cannon, the mouth cannon, the tail laser, and the jaw blade. And like we said, holds the team together. Blue is really the one that holds the team together per Mitch Iverson's Let's Voltron podcast episode number 73.
Because Laura doesn't actually get to, she starts to say it in the show and Lance actually interrupts him. So when we were putting this together, I was like, where is that answer? And I had to get it from Mitch.
Right.
For Red Lion has had the same pilot for all iterations except for one, though Lance does eventually move up in that case. Unlike the original series, the change resulted in both of Red Lion's pilots remaining on the Force. That's a comparison to in Blue's case, where Sven, because of what happens to him in the original show, is no longer in the group, and then Allura takes his place. In this case, both Keith and Lance stay, but switch positions. To get this lion was also important to me, also because Lance was my favorite character from the original series, and also Michael Bell is the only voice actor from the show that I've actually met in person. It was at a eulogy for Peter Keith, but that's another story for another time. The fire and flame, which I think match the attitude. It was Lance's attitude in most of the iterations, and Keith's attitude in VLD. Are the hallmarks of the power source of every iteration of the Red Lion. in both the TV ones. Quintessence, as you pointed out, is the primary thing that runs everything. But it is interesting that in other documents of this, we didn't address this too much in any of the other slides, that for VLD they still talk about them as the elements, even though quintessence runs everything. Greg, did you find any specifics as to why that was when you were doing the research on this?
I did not, except to say that quintessence was so integral to the overall story arc with the Galra Empire and with Minerva and Zarkon and all that. I think they just wanted to keep that theme going throughout that show, and I think that was why they changed it.
Okay, cool. Now for Go Lion, there's a number of different weapons here. A lot of fire-based weapons here. I don't know all of these. Greg did the research for us on the Go Lion stuff. Big fire, double pod, eye flash, full energy?
I've forgotten what some of these mean, to be honest with you. I was digging through the subtitles of the DVDs, the Go Lion DVDs, and okay, there's one. And it's been months, I do not remember what all
Fair
these
enough, that one just seemed a little vague. The rest of them I can visualize pretty much, like a magma laser, magma missiles, red cutter, red fire, red laser, red missiles, red sword, and red swords. There must have been a point, I guess, where they forms multiples.
Yes. I don't remember.
Hey, that's the writers for you sometimes, especially with the Japanimation. And again, here's an interesting point that I didn't mention on the other one, but it's true. This is true again because it's both shows. The episode just has a different title. There is a giant gold statue, if memory serves. It's called Lotor, or is it Zarkon?
I believe it was Lotor.
Okay, I got it right. And basically, Red Lion heats up in order to be able to melt the statue and be able to hide in the statue and then come back out of it later. And as we've said, a lot of the weapons are the same between both the ships. They kept the names are not always the same, but they do the same functions. For Red Lion in Voltron, the third dimension, again, we've talked about the two different forms. We'll get more into that later today. Specific to stealth, we've got ultra stealth mode, spinning laser discs, and chest beam. And many features of the regular Red Lion are features that are consistent among all lions within the iterations. But things I noticed that were unique to the V3D Lion were Inferno and the 10 megaton heat beam.
Go Technobabble.
Exactly! Hooked up to this, when Daniel's hooked up to this, in addition to everything it can regularly do, it has speed boost power. Selected weapons that I thought were worthy of pointing out that were specific to Red Lion here were the Fire Breath, the Magma Blast, and the Magma Laser, because they very specifically got called out at key points in episodes that I watched mainly to prep for review with you folks. So. Now, for Legendary Defender, Plasma Cannon, Magma Beam, Mouth Cannon, Tail Laser, and Jaw Blade. We see a lot of themes that continue. And Allura's description in the show of this line is that it's faster and yet more unstable, which tends to fit its mannerism, that is for sure. Now, Greg, want to pick up green?
All right, on with the Green Lion. This is another iteration, or another lion where the pilot has been pretty much the same, except in one iteration, in this case of Voltron Force, when Pidge resigns and Vince replaces him as the Green Lion pilot late in the show. But for all the other iterations, it was Pidge all the way. Go Pidge. And we are neglecting to mention the original Paladins in VLD, but we all know them, right? Yeah, anyway. So Green Lion, the wind or the forest is a consistent power source across all the different Voltron iterations, except again in Legendary Defender, where quintessence is the main thing, but there's still references. And of course, Green Lion was discovered inside of that tree stumpy thing in the very earliest episodes of Legendary Defender. There's another long list of weapons. You get the gist of it here, and just a bunch of great green green named wind-based weapons, in addition to weapons that are common across other lines. I would point out that the green needles weapon is unique in that you were asking Mark about where these weapons come from. In Go Lion, this is the one weapon where we actually see where it is inside the lion when it's not deployed. There's a scene where the lion is underwater and it gets a big gash in it during combat against a roe beast, or what they called Death Black Beastmen, I believe is what they were called in Go Lion. And it gets a big gash in it and water leaks in, and they call that chamber the Needle Bay, and it's actually the weapon that appears on the back of the lion and shoots the green needles. So presumably all the other weapons hide inside the lion somehow.
Right, and before you advance, I noticed you had one other note. Now, I didn't put this on the header slides about the pilots because it was a one-time thing in the show's case, but I think it's worth pointing out.
Yeah, so, good point. In the earliest Go Lion episodes, they had not yet found Black Lion's key, and Shorty, or Suzuishi in Go Lion, who was Pidge in Voltron, is temporarily not with the rest of the team, and so Kogane, the Keith character, operates Green Lion in their very first adventure. And kudos to the Go Lion animators when they show the whole launch sequence, when you see the characters in their little chairs rise up into the lions. They show Keith going up into Green Lion, so they actually made a custom backdrop for that one use, which was really cool. Yeah, extra for that week, that's right. Okay, and the same stuff applies to Green Lion and Defender of the Universe, where Keith is out in the Green Lion in the very first adventure. Some of the weapons, I remember there was a weapon called the Spike Bomb, which was kind of a football-shaped weapon with a bunch of little spikes all over it. Hey, Spike Bomb. And again, many, many other weapons. Think Go Lion, just change the names to protect the innocent. And then in the third dimension, so I had mentioned early on that the pilots in the third dimension eventually learned to control the lions telepathically, and this was the last of the 5 lions to form that link with its pilot, because Pidge was kind of a skeptic and wasn't really onto the whole telepathy thing, but eventually that came around and they all did what they needed to do. And again, the weapons here are pretty much lather, rinse, repeat across the other lines that we've covered thus far. The Stealth Lion had, it's all the same kind of stuff. The Quark Jump, the short range teleportation, ultra stealth mode, chest beam, laser discs, and all that. And Voltron Force, those just about lost the microphone. That would have been an unintentional mic drop, ladies and gentlemen. The unique weapons of Green Lion were the big cannon on the back. So in Voltron Force, the Green Lion also had a visible weapon. Boomer blades were shot from the tail. That was Green Lion's unique tail weapon, and it could, shoot wind out of its mouth, again, echoing past iterations. And then in Legendary Defender, the Green Lion had been described as inquisitive and needing a pilot of intellect and daring, and of course Pidge fit that bill. So Green Lion, of course, had that very large shield on the back, had the Vine Cannon, and then the more traditional weapons of the other lions. I do think it's fun that somehow the shield on Green Lion's back relocates when it combines to form Voltron. It's there down near the shoulders, and when it's combined as Voltron, it's up at it's near the hindquarters, and how it makes that leap is pretty magical, I guess. Quintessence, I guess.
Of course, now we're going to form the head, and we're talking about Black Lion. So Black Lion has had 3 different pilots over the television iterations. So in the original, we had Keith. In V3D, we had Keith. In Voltron Force, we had Daniel and Keith. And in V3D, we had Shiro and Keith. Hunk wasn't really upset when he wasn't able to pilot Black Lion in V3D, was he?
No, Karan was. Karan was very upset.
Okay, so for Black Lion's power, this kind of varies widely between the iterations. So with Go Lion, It comes from lightning energy conducted by thunder protons, technobabble. From Voltron, Defender of the Universe, mostly lightning. From Voltron, the Third Dimension, air, sky, and space. From Voltron Force, lightning presumably, because we don't talk about it much. In Voltron Legendary Defender, it's definitely the quintessence, but some publications refer to Black Lion as the guardian spirit of sky or guardian spirit of the cosmos, which would relate to the air, sky, and space again. So some of the selected weapons, Black did have a black bazooka, a black beam, a black boomerang, black cutters, a black missile, black sword, black wing, and eye flash.
Eye flash was the goal line term for eye beams. The black wing was, I forget what the name of the weapon was in Voltron, we'll probably get to it on the next slide, but that was when the wings on the Black Lion's back would extend and then shoot off like a kind of a bladed weapon.
In Defender of the Universe? Yeah. So we had the missile deflection wing, many others, and of course that includes Fleet of Doom. And then with Go Lion weapons, but usually with different names. So then in V3D we had the air, sky, and space as the power. So the selected weapons range from laser fangs, shoulder lasers, iron claw, mouth missiles, forearm missiles, all grapnels.
So in the third dimension, each lion could raise a foot and it would shoot a grapnel, like a cable with a hook at the end, and it could latch onto spacecraft and stuff like that. The lions did a lot more combat with spacecraft in the third dimension than they did in the prior iterations, so that was a handy weapon.
And then, of course, the mouth lasers and the heat shield. And then the stealth lion had the eye beams, the shield, the ultra stealth mode, the anti-stealth diffuser. Can you describe that?
It diffuses stuff in an anti-stealth capacity.
And then the stealth beam. In Voltron Force, Black Lion was considered the alpha among the lions. In fact, there was one description in one of the episodes where the lions had gone rogue, and in order to get them back, Keith had to go after Black Lion and then show that he was the leader of the Voltron Force. And along with the leader is what was described as why Black is the head, or the alpha. So the selected weapons in Black Lion for Voltron Force were the eye beams, the taser tail, also known as the shock tail, the black bazooka, and the energy tether.
I think that was sort of like a rope that it could be fired, and I think, if I remember correctly, I think that's how they kept the lions corralled together in that ghost ship episode where they were kind of floating around freely in space, I think.
And then in Legendary Defender, the ephemeral blades, also known as bladed wings, the mouth cannon, the tail laser, and the jaw blade, and per Allura in Legendary Defender, considered the decisive head of Voltron is what Black is.
Now, when we were originally talking about pitching this for VoltCon, the idea was, as you're seeing in the logo, 5 years, 5 lions. But when you look at the mythos of Voltron, there's a 6th, and it's the white lion. And it's a powerful piece of mythos. No, not that, but this is an interesting piece out of my personal collection. I thought, given we were talking about V3D, I'd throw that in. What this is that I'd gotten to know some of the people at Netter Digital, and they did a little piece for me on my birthday, putting a white lion in front of my then apartment in LA. But no, that's not what we're here to talk about today. For the white lion, we see appearances of it in both Go Lion and Defender of the Universe. The difference between the two is that in Go Lion, Allura believes that the white lion is the spirit of her mother reincarnated. In Defender of the Universe, they say that it's Alpha. But later on in the episode, when she's caught in the mane of what turns out to be this roe beast, She sees visions of her mother both times, which is a little more confusing watching it in the dubbed version, but it makes total sense in Go Lion. Now there are two other appearances that have used a white lion, and that's in Legendary Defender, where there is a spirit of a white lion that is the guardian of planet Orion, where they find a lot of the secrets that they're looking for. And in a quick nod to the comics, this is one of those few places we did throw a comics reference in, is there's a Robotech Voltron comic book crossover where that includes a white lion that is flown by Rick Hunter. So that was kind of a cool reference to see that in print.
So yeah, to those of you who don't remember this character, this is Stride the Tiger Fighter. I know Jeremy mentions him quite a bit in some of his presentations. So what about no tigers? What if he changed his stripes? So over the 40 years since, actually what's it now? 42 years since Beast King Lion premiered in Japan, the impact of a pride of 5 similar but unique robot lions is memorable and iconic across all of its incarnations. In each Voltron iteration, the lions, while different in each of them, continue to resonate. They're powerful, but unified, not just as a group, but in Voltron, they literally combine and work as one. It looks super cool. And, you know, so does the robot. I mean, how many other robots do you know that have 5 lion heads on it? Hands, feet, and helmet. Pretty awesome. And we're not lying. We're telling the honest truth.
I did want to mention one thing. In some of the iterations of Voltron, they mentioned how the pilots must be compatible, or they must be matched with the personality of the lion. When you see Voltron Legendary Defender and you see all of the pilots are there, when they find Blue Lion, none of them could get through except for Lance.
Right.
And it was because it deemed Lance as the worthy pilot. And when you see some of the other versions, like when Karan is telling the story about how he and Wade had worked together, and Wade had tried to pilot the Black Lion and he was rejected.
Yeah, that was in Voltron Force. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this idea also in Voltron, the Third Dimension, where they tried to have robot pilots for each of the lions. And that was basically, Amalgamus had said that that's what had to happen. What we found out soon after that was that it's the soul of the lion that has to match with the soul of the pilot. And it only worked that way when those two were together.
Right, and for those of you who aren't that familiar with Voltron, the Third Dimension, the idea that tech could run everything was a real ongoing theme, because Amalgamus was essentially a giant computer who had all the programming of all the Alliance worlds and how they would vote, and he represented everything. So he was the voice for tech solves everything, we don't need soul, and that was the whole point, was Voltron was more than just tech.
And of course, in the original incarnation, they had to have human pilots, because who else was going to twist those handles?
We want to thank you for this presentation, but we wanted to see if there's any questions out there that anybody wanted to ask.
We don't know how much lion kitty litter costs. I'm sorry.
Do they ever explain in any of the cartoons the fact that the different lions are different sizes, but when they're like running a clock across a plane, that they all look the same size?
I think that's artistic license, honestly. There's really no other way to explain it. And Voltron Force has that issue in spades when the different lions interchange. So I think, it's just like how fast is warp speed in Star Trek? It's the speed that the plot requires in a given scene, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, we can talk about, how many times the speed of light. Well, it's just how long did the script need them to go from point A to point B, so.
Got it, it's magic.
Yeah. Anyone else?
How is your prototype coming along?
Slowly. But I will touch on that later today. Thanks for asking.
Only in some of them. If you look, for example, at VLD, it was kind of a group effort. If we look at Voltron Force, there's 5 different worlds that were involved. We never do find out what the 5th world is. In Voltron, the 3rd dimension, it's kind of interesting because we're introduced to the concept, and you saw her in the shot when we had the spirit shot. There was a woman with her hands outstretched and 5 lion souls behind her. That's Queen Ariella, the first queen of Eris, who precedes Alfor. And there's implications that she actually was involved in the creation as well in there. But prior to that, it's Alfor either implied or expressly said.
And I would say that in Legendary Defender, Alfor pretty much did create the lions from his alchemic knowledge that he gained at Orient, and of course the trans-reality war in that comet. So yeah, Alfor pretty much called the shots there too.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Well, in Defender of the Universe, didn't Voltron as a whole exist first, and then it was Hagar that broke it into the 5 lines?
Yes, Nancy, that is correct. But when I was thinking of the question specifically in terms of taking the single unit and then putting it back together, there would be 5 lions that could be flown to be reassembled. That's implied that Alfor did that all by himself. So that's where it gets to be a difficult question. Who made Voltron as a whole in that sense? We don't know.
And certainly in Go Lion, that is a complete mystery. They flat out say in the opening narration that Go Lion had been around for about 10,000 years and no one knew where Go Lion came from. Anyone else?
Well, I know this is not about this particular, but vehicle Voltron. Where did they say that comes from?
That is a great question.
I thought vehicle Voltron was mainly made by Earth, or the Galaxy Garrison.
Earth or wind or fire, like it. So it's certainly pretty much outright stated that the Garrison developed that robot.
But where did Lauren get the information? That's the question.
That's the question, yes. Anyone else?
Drum roll.
Yes.
Okay, so that's our time.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.